We are back for our 6.7 item, 11 a.m., public hearing, consideration of draft ordinance amending Chapter 21, Article 58 and Article 68 of the Lake County zoning ordinance relating to appeals. Director Turner.
Thank you. Mireya Turner, Community Development Director. The item you have before you now stemmed from a resolution of intent that was adopted by the board on September 22nd of last year. This item was brought to the board by Supervisor Sabatier, and the purpose of this ordinance is to amend the zoning code to require written documents pertaining to appeal hearings be submitted no later than 96 hours ahead of that hearing in order to be considered in a timely manner by the deciding body, which could either be the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors. This would require 3 amendments to the code, an amendment on each of the process sections for the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, and then the addition of a definition of I think it's documentary evidence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's clear what that means in that aspect. Let's see. The draft ordinance was reviewed by the Planning Commission and received their full support for a recommendation of approval prior to returning to you today. I think that I messed up on the motion, so I will defer to County Council to correct me on that one. But that concludes my report.
Supervisor Sabatier?
I just want to add, this doesn't prohibit people from submitting anything after the 96 hours. It's just, it doesn't, we have the choice as a body to continue with the hearing or decide, versus before it almost felt like we had to pause because of the fact that there was no timelines or guidelines on submissions of items, because obviously we have the verbal public comment as well as anything else. So just wanted to make sure that we're not prohibiting speech here. We're just asking to work with us so that we can get the majority of the documentation at a timely fashion.
Additionally, one point that was brought up during that Board of Supervisors meeting was a concern for lack of public input. And it was noted at that time that the significant amount of written documentation comes usually from the appellant, who would have had the full at least 10-day notice of the upcoming appeal date.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you. The plain language of the ordinance appears to suggest that tardy public input, if it was not prohibited, at least in the case of the Planning Commission, they would be prohibited from considering any late submitted evidence. Also, while perhaps the bulk of the written material may come from an appellant, it really depends on the way the appeal is structured. If it's an appeal of a denial, that's one thing. If it's an appeal of a project that's been approved, that's quite another thing. And the people submitting comments would not, in some cases, be an applicant who has a 10-day notice. Also, if they're members of the public that do want to submit argument, they have to do it 96 hours in advance. The agenda for the meeting itself is only posted 72 hours in advance. So these are quasi-judicial proceedings. Due process suggests that everyone gets a fair shake and gets to make whatever comments they want to in support or against the appeal. And notwithstanding, I get it. Late arriving evidence is no fun for anybody, but it happens. And to give a full and complete appeal hearing, I think you need to give people not a 4-day cutoff deadline, especially when the agenda has a 3-day cutoff deadline for posting. So if an appeal hearing is going to happen, everyone should have full notice that it is happening, should have full opportunity to provide comments timely. A shorter limitation, 24 hours, something like that would be one thing, but a 96-hour limitation seems to me a little bit over the top.
Supervisor Sabatier?
I'd like to ask Ms. Grant, the way that this is written does not prohibit submissions within 24 hours. This is documentary evidence, not public comment, correct?
Yes, it won't prevent public comment, but when you're talking about written materials, it might be a good idea to clarify that. I believe what you're actually talking about here are parties to the appeal, which is to avoid 30-page briefs from attorneys for an applicant or an appellant at the 11th hour, which necessitates either a cursory review by your board or continuing the matter as you had stated. So, it may be possible just simply to state any party to the appeal.
And can we change that maybe in the definitions?
Yes, I'm not sure.
Says any document which is offered and admitted as evidence during an administrative appeal, planning commission appeal, or a board of supervisors appeal as provided in Article 58 of Chapter 21 of the Lake County zoning ordinance. Can we say any document which is offered and admitted as evidence by the appellant or applicant or whatever the...
By a party to the appeal, yeah. I think you can make those changes. It's not to circumvent the public's right to comment, and the public would certainly be allowed to comment in writing. Of course, not all of that's going to rise to the level of evidence either, but just to ensure clarity by stating party to the appeal, then it would, I think, address what you're looking to address, which is to prevent the last-minute submission by lawyers. We tend to do that, and it does make it difficult oftentimes for your board to address a matter with efficiency because oftentimes the documentation is quite voluminous.
Thank you. And I'd be interested in making that final amendment just to clarify the specific parties to which we're discussing about.
Supervisor Green?
Could it be amending the definition of documentary evidence? That may be the easiest way to do it. And appellant's documentary evidence or something like that. So any document offered and admitted as evidence by an appellant during an administrative appeal, planning commission appeal, or board of supervisors appeal. Would that be clarification?
Well, I wouldn't limit it just to the appellant because the department may also want to submit evidence, and you're talking about due process and fairness. You'd want the same rule to apply to the submission of evidence when you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity. But there is, when you're talking 72 hours and 96 hours, that does present somewhat of a disconnect, as you know.
And the whole reason is to make sure that those documents are within the, I'm sorry, Chair.
Go ahead.
The whole reason is to make sure that the documentary evidence is in the agenda so the public as well as the Board of Supervisors can come prepared to a meeting rather than being surprised with a 100-page packet that we've received numerous times in the past in the morning when we approached the dais, so.
Right, I think you said the purpose was to ensure that the packet was complete at the time that it's made public.
Yes.
One additional point of consideration, if I may. The agenda, which would include the packet that would be made public, can be posted no later than 72 hours prior to the meeting. While we do try to get materials out to the Planning Commission and board as soon as we can, we sometimes need to rely on that 72-hour deadline. So if the department was required to hold to that 96-hour timeline, that could create a little bit of difficulty. It might not. We might be able to pull it off, but it's just, we'd have to keep in mind that we have two separate deadlines. One is Brown Act, one is the additional hours to get the board or the Planning Commission any required documentation.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this item? Chambers or in Zoom?
Nothing in Zoom.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the ordinance amending Chapter 21, Article 58, and Article 68 of the Lake County zoning ordinance relating to appeals with the amendments as suggested by County Council.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Wait,
Oh,
Can council restate the amendments?
Yes, I can. Just a moment. Also, I would say that the motion in this case is going to be the motion to waive reading of the ordinance, have it read in title only, waive reading of the ordinance as amended, and I'll recite the amendments in just a moment. And then you'll have a separate motion to advance for second reading 5 days hence, or in this case, to February 7th.
so we'll rescind that motion?
I make the motion, and then you'll tell us what the amendment is?
You can make the motion, and I can tell you what the, yeah, and I do understand the 96 hours, but again, it's unlikely that even the planning commission or the board will see the documentation before the 72 hours. So 96 may be difficult for all parties necessarily. But anyway, moving forward with this, it would be any party to the appeal wishing to provide documentary evidence and/or written argument shall submit such documentation to the Secretary of Planning Commission no later than 96 hours prior to the date at the time of the public hearing. Documentary evidence and/or written argument submitted after that time shall not be considered by the Planning Commission. That's an amendment to Section 58.17 of Chapter 21, the Lake County zoning ordinance. And 58.27 shall be amended to read, submission of documentary evidence and/or written argument. Any party to the appeal wishing to provide documentary evidence and/or written argument shall submit such documentation to the Secretary of the Planning Commission no later than 96 hours prior to the date at the time of the public hearing. Documentary evidence and/or written argument submitted after that time shall not be considered by the Planning Commission. And then under definitions, D, which shows in Section 3 of the ordinance, documentary evidence number 10, any document which is offered by a party to an appeal and is admitted into evidence any document which is offered and admitted as evidence during an administrative appeal, Planning Commission appeal, or Board of Supervisors appeal by a party thereto, as provided in Article 58 of Chapter 21 of the Lake County zoning ordinance.
Thank you for that.
Oh, are you rescinding your motion, or are you amending it, or?
I'm going to amend it. Ms. Grant, if you can help me out. The waiving of the reading, read it by title only.
Motion to waive reading of the ordinance as amended and have it read in title only.
And have it read in title. So I move to waive the reading of the ordinance as amended and read it by title only.
Second.
We got a motion.
I think we're good. Just
Point of order then, are you amending the 96 hours or leaving it as is?
leaving it as is.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No?
Okay, motion passes.
And then I move to advance the second.
I gotta read it.
Oh, right.
So sorry.
Okay, it's an ordinance amending Chapter 21, Article 58, and Chapter 21, Article 68 of the Lake County zoning ordinance pertaining to appeals. All right.
Thank you. And then I move to advance the second reading to February 7th.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And we will move on to the next item. Item 6.8, our 11:30 a.m. public hearing, consideration of draft ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 2 of the Lake County Code, setting forth procedures for expediting permit processing for electric vehicle charging stations as required by Government Code Section 65850.7, AB 1236, 2015, to Department of Community Development. Director Turner.
Thank you. Mireya Turner, Community Development Director. I also have with me Sarah Whitman, our Staff Services Analyst. I wanted to make sure that she was here because she did help me out with the bulk of the preparation of this item. However, she doesn't really want to talk to you, so I'll... Anyway, but if I could just take a moment to just express my appreciation to the staff that we have in the Community Development Department. I'm supposed to learn delegation as a director, so I survive, and I've been extremely thankful that as I reach out and ask different members of our staff to take on certain tasks, we have a wonderfully able body of staff resources upstairs. So I continue to be impressed and thankful by all the assistance that they offer. Sarah is one glowing example of that. What you have before you this morning, or no, today, is the last few items required for the county to come into compliance with AB 1236, which was approved in the state in 2015. And the purpose of it is to streamline the processes of electric vehicle permit applications. So there are a number of ways that jurisdictions were supposed to do this by this act. And what I say were because there continue to be additional laws coming from the state regarding the streamlining of this permit process. But for this one, for AB 1236, it was the adoption of an ordinance, the creation of an objective checklist, the electronic submittal option for applications, and an expedited processing of the plans. We have already been doing two of those three, the expedited processing of the plans and allowing them to be submitted to us electronically. So we've also been using our existing checklist to meet the needs of the electronic vehicle charging station permit applications. And so today, what we're bringing before you today is the checklist, the separate checklist that we were required to produce, as well as the ordinance before you today. But just to make sure the board is clear, we have for quite some time been expediting the processing of these permits. Because this is an internal process amendment and not something specific to land use, this did not go before the Planning Commission for their consideration. I just brought it straight to the board for your consideration. That concludes my report, but I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to all of your staff. Comments from the board? Yes, Supervisor Sabatier?
Next time our board goes to an RCRC meeting, we will now be on that map of people who have done it, and we will all
Right
feel
here.
better about it.
That's what I was gonna say, so we're good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, any other,
Just one quick question. You said, how many permits do we have? Do you have any idea who's been putting these up? Just to think Caltrans, a few other places I know of, but just a
Our
question.
chief building official, when I touched base with him on this, said we generally get about 1 to 2 a year. So it's not very many, it's very few at this time. They hope that it will increase, that's part of why this was all put in place by the state, is my understanding. But we have 1 or 2 a year, and it takes generally a week or less to process those. As long as the applicant has all their documentation, it moves very quickly.
That's good to know, because we do want to encourage that as we're going. More and more vehicles coming into Lake County, so I know businesses and other opportunities are looking at that, so.
Absolutely, and the checklist will be available both in hard copy at the counter as well as electronically on our website.
I see we have Doug Gerhardt from Air Quality. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. I was just going to mention, since I was kind of disappointed to hear we only get 1 to 2 a year, which is kind of shocking with the electric vehicle infrastructure issues and things in California. But we are working on grants to be able to help with the infrastructure to install EV charging stations. So hopefully within the next 6 months or so, as soon as we have a little better staffing, we will be pursuing that and making it available for people to apply for those grants. And it doesn't cover the charging station itself, but it helps with the infrastructure that is needed to install the charging station. So we may be able to incentivize getting more charging stations into Lake County and increasing that accessibility for the EV transition that's coming.
Great.
If I might also add to what Doug just let you know. A couple weeks ago, I was getting my car serviced locally and was talking about replacing my 2006 vehicle with an electric vehicle in the future. And he said that to date, there has been no requirement that the electric vehicle manufacturers share the maintenance and repair technology with our local car service places. So I know that doesn't have anything to do with this, so I'll keep that really brief. But you might want to keep that as you're thinking about advocacy for Lake County at the state level. That might be a good thing, is to lend our voice to increase the pressure for those manufacturers to share that technology, so that I don't have to go to Santa Rosa to get an electric vehicle serviced. I can stay local.
It's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. I will open up for public comment in the chambers or in the Zoom room. Is there anybody in Zoom?
I don't see any.
Okay, then I'll bring it back to the board.
Madam Chair, before I make the motion, I'll just add that as similar to the Golden State Connect, when we jump through specific hoops, this is basically the same thing that with the map. There's a Golden State Finance has a zero emissions vehicles initiative, and this will put us in line to be a part of when they're starting to look out for funding, just like Mr. Gerhardt said, we would be eligible for that also through them. So, yeah. I will go ahead and motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance. No?
No, it'll be a motion to waive reading of the ordinance and have it read in title only.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, and then it's an ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 2, setting forth procedures for expediting permit processing for electric vehicle charging systems, and then electric vehicle charging station permit expediting ordinance. In parentheses, that thing.
Madam Chair, if I may, the second motion will be a motion to advance the second reading of the ordinance to February 7th.
So moved.
And second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.